about to begin the QB Power Hour webinar series. The QB Power Hour is a free bi-weekly webinar series for accounting professionals presented by Michelle Long and Dan DeLong, who are very passionate about the industry, QuickBooks, and apps that integrate with QuickBooks. You can find out all the details about the webinar series at qbpowerhour.com. So without further ado, here's Michelle and Dan.
Well, welcome everybody to another QB Power Hour. We are talking today about bank reconciliations in QuickBooks Online. Very exciting stuff, right? Because that's what we're here for, right? I mean, that is like Michelle, what would you equate bank reconciliations or just reconciling accounts to in like a hierarchy of things?
It's like the core of our business a lot of times. I mean, it's like one of the central things that we do to make sure we've got all the transactions and that things are in there. And it's one of the starting points to getting everything in there. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like, if you're, the old saying of counting beans, right? I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road. Right.
Carolyn says it's like washing the dishes, something you have to do all the time.
I remember when I first got started in working with QuickBooks Online, reconciliations were the absolute bane of my existence. I hated them, especially in the old system. It just took forever and it was a nightmare. And we're going to show today like how it's so much easier. It's going to be pretty cool.
So as the elder statesman in the on the panel, Michelle, what was that like?
Well, now I don't like this elder business. Experience, maybe. It is amazing. It is amazing how far bank recs have come. Talking about bank recs, it just reminded me, speaking of elder or experience, in my very first internship that I had with Hallmark Cards, which I'm talking about Hallmark Corporate, the private company, it would be a Fortune 500 company if they were public. But anyway, so my first job, I was reconciling a bank account. This was back in the manual days, it was mainframe system, manual days. Anyway, I was off like $10,000 on this account, and I couldn't for the life of me find it, I had checked everything, and this was the old days where you got your ruler, and you're line through things and checking them off to the bank statement, the old-fashioned way that we had to do it, the hard way. I couldn't find it. I was off like $10,000, so I went and asked my manager, hey, can you help me with this? He was like, it's immaterial. We'll look for it next month. My first lesson in immateriality was $10,000 on like a $2 million bank account was immaterial. It was like, no big deal. We'll just look for it next month. I was like, oh my gosh. But look how far bank recs have come to where we are today, where it's pulling in the statements, it's pulling in this whole bank feed, automating the transactions, and now it's pulling in bank balances in the month for us and it's doing the reconciliation for us. I mean, wow.
Yeah, literally. I mean, I was telling Matt when we were preparing for this webinar is that I literally reconciled 6 months of an account in less than a minute, and with the tools that are now available. It's amazing how far it's come. There's Casey.
Sorry.
Casey said it took
agrees.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
He's shocked too.
Yeah. Can't believe it. All right, well, let's go ahead and kick us off here. Go ahead, and Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Long, CPA, newly retired. I can't even figure out what I am these days. Former owner of Longs for Success. I still own it. Actually, my whole career, I've wanted a jewelry client. I finally got a jewelry client. I couldn't say no. I'm going to wind up paying him more than he ever pays me. Anyway, I've got all kinds of projects lined up with my new client, and I am getting him set up and going. That's a great thing about being retired. You can decide what you want to say yes or no to. But anyway, I'll get him going, and then I'll turn him over to my son, for the ongoing work. But anyhow, that's enough about me. Dan, go ahead.
All right. My name is Dan DeLong, owner of Dan With and School of Bookkeeping, worked at Intuit for nearly 18 years and co-hosting today, as well as the Workshop Wednesdays over at schoolofbookkeeping.com and doing some tech editing for some of the QBO books and QuickBooks books that are out there. And joining us today, friend of the show.
Need a haircut,
Matthew.
otherwise I'd kind of look like that, but I'm still Matthew Fulton. My friends call me Spot, founder and owner of Parkway Business Solutions. We focus primarily on workflow design, still do a whole bunch of accounting, but highly selective on the clients we bring on. I helped click the light switch on for QB Community Live, the Facebook group, but they're the ones that keep it going, of course. Also, which kind of ties into some of the stuff today, is I am a workflow consultant for LedgerSync. It's an application that actually helps you grab all your transactions, your statements, and your images so you can have everything on one single dashboard for all your clients. And very, very happy to be here and be a guest co-host. Thank you guys for asking.
Appreciate you joining us here today, and the sweetening that you did on the presentation slides is forever. I'll forever be in your debt because I'll be leveraging the consistencies that you've done here. So appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, a little bit about the QB Power Hour. It's every other Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern. This one is not eligible for CPE credits, but the first one of the month will be with our friends at Makers Hub. Will be our CPE sponsor, but this one is not. So we just want to make sure that everybody's aware that even though it's a great topic and and should be, we just want to try to make it an easier option of just that first one of the month, whatever that happens to be, would be eligible for CPE credit. And if the links there, and I did put them in the chat for today's slides. The landing page that we have set up for today has the handouts, and we'll have the replay and the podcast and whatnot. But if you go to qbpowerhour.com/resources, there's PDFs and recordings of all of the prior QB Power Hour webinars. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have specific questions about something that we're talking about here today, please put them in the Q&A. But if you just have general things about what do you equate bank reconciliation to, put them in the comments in the chat. All right. And we are simulcasting, which again, it reminds me that I didn't do the simulcast. So I got to do that once we transition over for our first poll question. But on the Facebook group into the QB Power user group, if you're watching there, whenever I do put it in there, you'll want to make sure that the streaming platform that we're using has access to your profile, so we know who you are when you, if you happen to say something in the group there while we're streaming. And thank you, Matt, for putting me in a pink hat, because we do have a QB Power Hour store with some swag. And I do look pretty good in pink there, I think.
Bringing sexy back, for sure. I'm loving it.
It's a great color on you, Dan. I think it looks awesome.
Check it out if you want. And you too can have your own pink hat. All right, so our agenda today, we're going to be talking about just reconciling in QuickBooks Online in general, some common challenges, some specialized workflows. Matthew, excuse me, I was thinking Maker's Mark and not wanting to say Maker's Mark, and then I threw in Mark for Matt. Oh my goodness, one of those days. But we have some, Matthew has some specific workflows to help out with reconciliation, and we have some helpful tools, and hopefully if time permits, we have some QA time. So I'm going to stop sharing because we have our first poll question. How frequently much time are you spending, average in a month, reconciling accounts for clients? And I'm looking for the whole question. There we go. Launching it. Okay, and I'll launch that, and I will stop sharing. So Spot can pick up.
And yep, I'm doing that as we speak. And Michelle was telling us earlier that it's her fault actually that you were talking about
That's
Mark and
right.
everything
That's
else.
right.
Everything is Michelle.
She is
It's like
more than the goat. She is the goat.
the,
Not just the goat
no.
in accounting. She is the goat for all that goes wrong today.
No, it's funny though. The Taylor Swift song "Me, I'm the Problem." That's
No,
me
I don't.
today. You obviously aren't a Chiefs fan then, because if you're a Chiefs fan, you have to be a Taylor Swift fan too. I wasn't a big Taylor Swift fan until she was Kelsey girlfriend, and now I am a big Taylor Swift fan too. And I can't wait for the Chiefs season to start. Which, by the way, Dan, we got to get some bets going again.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't play your team this year, I don't think.
It sounds like you're scared.
No, I just don't remember. I'm just trying to remember, but I don't think we do. Anyway, sorry. Back to reconciling.
Yeah, and so to answer kind of the questions in the chat, I made these polls in my head. I was wondering, kind of like I said before, the reconciliations used to take me so much time, and I was wondering how much time it takes on average for you to reconcile your accounts for like all the accounts for one client. Because hey, you could have 2 accounts, you could have 10 accounts, just depends on the amount of time spent. So
yeah, and there's definitely other things other than financial institutions that you could want to reconcile yourself, like clearing accounts and those types of things. So it certainly could add up more so than financial institutions.
So
let me go ahead and end the poll here, and I'll share the results. Looks like majority is 15 to 30 minutes
nice.
per client. So if you have a lot of clients, then that could certainly add up as a lot of time of the day.
I would venture to guess too, a lot of that time is spent going and getting the bank statement. Now that we have the statement there or the balance there, I think the time spent reconciling is going to go down in a vast number of clients. Not every client. There's always the exception to the rule. But I think a lot of that time is going to be reduced. What do you guys think?
I definitely agree. I mean, having worked with an application that's been fetching statements for so many years, trying to get this to be a consistent process of automating that fetching is extremely difficult because the different institutions change how it's done all the time. So we actually kind of touch base on that through some of this. And I will give the full disclaimer to everybody that's here. If you know me, I love to try to share as much information as possible. So this is definitely a deck that's worth downloading because there will be additional information. I've got some workflow tip things that are added in that we can go through somewhat quick to always make sure we have enough time for your questions to, Q&A at the end. But definitely take the time to download it. So, Michelle, you brought this up real quickly earlier. There's so much more that you need to reconcile than just your basic checking and savings account. The credit cards as well. So financial institutions, I say it that way because it's all of that. It could be loan accounts as well. Clearing accounts, of course, especially when you're using third-party apps. I'm a firm believer, when in doubt, wreck the account. And I don't mean wreck it as in W. I mean wreck it as in reconcile.
No wrecking it, Ralph.
Yes, exactly right. And some of the tips and things in here have to do with our accounting tools, just in case there are those who are just being introduced to those. Report options in there. You can see when all your last reconciliations were done very quickly and easily. And at the top, you can even change your dating of all your common reports. Super important to know as well. But this is where the real fun comes into play, right? It's the automatic statement fetching. So this new functionality.
I thought they could have used a dog for this icon, but
yeah. You know what?
You want to play fetch or
dog named Spot would have been great. I would have actually been honored that way.
Yeah.
So one of the key things, not all financial institutions are supported for the fetching. That's one challenge. It's evolving and it's growing, but if they don't support it, you still have to go get the stuff. And then also keep in mind, the login credentials have to be good. So in the chat, if you have a client that is so wonderful and they love to change their banking passwords every 2 weeks because they can't remember their password, say, yeah, that's me. I'm sure we've all got those, which cost us tons of extra time and energy. Now, the cool thing with this though is if you've cleared the bank feed and you've done your last reconciliation, these bottom windows here, statement ending date and ending balance, will auto fill in the amounts for you. You can then view the statement pulled up on your second monitor and start to get into your reconciliation part. So, and what do we got here? Not every third-party app that says it should, that's a very good point. So, you know, kind of getting into this stuff, we want to talk about some of the common challenges that you need to really pay attention to. Most important right away, when you're looking at the statement, of course, you've got your beginning, your ending balance. You should be, you know, if it's taking you only 1 minute, please make sure you're doing these things. The balance of the deposits, you're checking the dollar amount, you're checking the dollar amount of the money in, the money out each, and the number of transactions. Because remember, I could do a plus 10,000 here and a plus 10,000 here, and it would still reconcile. And now you have 2 extra transactions that shouldn't even exist there. So you've got to really look at that part. Shortcuts lead to long year-end closes, so be very careful. Michelle, Dan, before I go a little further, what other kind of like common challenges do you think are that you've seen the most out there? As well as in the chat, what are the common challenges you all have seen?
What the biggest thing, and when I was, you know, my 18 years talking to, you know, small business owners and accountants at Intuit, was that opening balance not being what it was when they reconciled it last month. I mean, that was just a large call driver, right? Because, you know, you reconcile it 1 month, you would expect the ending balance to be the opening balance the next month that you go and do that. I mean, it was a reasonable expectation, you know, what that happened. But, you know, the thing is that opening balance, this is one of those fundamental truths of QuickBooks that I would tell people, is that it's just the sum of the reconciled transactions in that account when you go to reconcile. It is not pulling from history, right? It is just, it is one of those things that is recalculated when you go to reconcile. If one of my coworkers said something to a customer, and it's always stuck with me, that opening balance, especially in QuickBooks Online, opening balance is like a pirate ship. There's R's in there, right? And that's all it's doing is adding up all of the transactions that are R's that in the register and putting that in there. And if it doesn't add up, I mean, if it doesn't,
that's my quote of the day. That's just
a good way to remember it.
There.
Yeah, I
exactly.
like it.
And it was easy for me to remember that way, and it's always stuck with me. And that the fundamental truth about that is that, regardless of what you expect it to be, right? Because you reconciled it last month, that opening balance is just a recalculation when you go into the screen of everything in that register at that moment in time that has an R on it. And that's what it's going to be. I mean, you can do the same thing, but run a report outside of it to, you know, for transactions that are reconciled, and that should match what's showing up in your opening balance, right? So that was the biggest challenge, I think, when it didn't match, is now hunting down what changed, and that screen that says, hey, it's not ready because it's different, and, you know, it gives you a little bit of, you know, breadcrumb trails to go down. It's really part of it, you know, it's a challenge because there's a variety of things that change. And that's what I would tell people, is that something changed from the time that you reconciled it to today, that there's no longer an R in there that was there before, or there's an R in there that shouldn't be there, that wasn't there before.
And that's one of the things I would like to give Intuit kudos for giving us that, where it says, stop, wait a minute, your beginning balance has changed, and here's the transactions that have changed. It allows you to go in and find them, because that saves us so much time over looking for it the way we had to in the past. But, one of the other common challenges, Matt, that screenshot we had there was great, or Dan, whoever put it in there. It showed a couple of zeros at the very beginning of it. And as Matt was saying a while ago, you want to also reconcile clearing accounts. Have clearing accounts. So when you have a transaction where you're doing a $0 expense or a $0 check or a sales receipt that's a $0 sales receipt or whatever the situation is. And I'm not sure what those were from, but people will just leave them there forever. They forget that you're supposed to clear those things off. And that's one reason why we use a clearing account. We don't want them in our main checking account. So clearing up those kind of things out of here, as well as old outstanding checks that who knows what happened to them. Were they duplicates? Were they voided? Were they, somebody lost them and never cashed them? Researching and finding out what happened to them and what do we need to do, clearing out that old stuff that's there. I've gone in sometimes where you have to scroll down, like 50 of those before you even get to any of the real stuff, so cleaning up some of those things before you even get started is some of the main challenges too. So anyway, the point about the clearing account is a good one, to keep that out of the main checking account too.
Yeah. So I asked that question on purpose because I figured you guys would land on a whole bunch of these without necessarily even seeing what we'd already put in here, because it's more fun to have the conversation about it than you guys all just staring at slides. So missing, there's the things I have in here right off the bat. If you've got missing transactions, guess what? You really have no other choice but to first do a search through your magnifying glass. And I have QuickBooks pulled up back behind. I can go to that in a moment to show things, but there's so many nuances here to try to have them all prepared is difficult. So if you've got the missing transactions, do a search, try to make sure it didn't get into the wrong account because it's easy to be done. And if you can't find it anywhere, double check also that it wasn't multiple transactions combined together into one larger amount, or the other way around as well. Maybe the bank has multiple transactions, smaller amounts, and you combine them into one. These are the little pieces that Dan likes to call breadcrumbs. I like to call horrific rabbit holes that have you ending up in nowhere and frustrated on a Zoom with your client saying, "You promised me this would be easy. You told me, oh, this should be really easy for you." Famous last words.
Right.
Michelle, you nailed the clearing the uncleared transactions. In my mind, when I'm doing a reconciliation, every single transaction, every one of them has a story. So their story has either been told or it's still pending there. But if there are $0 items, still take a peek, make sure there's a reason, if you're the only one doing the books in there and you're cool with it, you can clear them out. If you're getting in fresh and brand new, I will usually leave them for the first time to see if I'm missing something else and need to tie it back, and the memo notes or something help me better understand it. But you want to get those cleared out so there's less junk in your way. 2 little tips. If you still have people writing checks, get them to have the bank put on their void after 60 days, because it's going to make it to where legally you don't have to honor it after 60 days. You should always go longer than that, of course, but it gives you the ability, like if it's been an extra 3-4 months, you can void those, do the proper workaround to show it's still owed, but you can void it and get that area cleared out. And then the last one is Right Tool. Hector made a really cool, we worked together and created this uncleared transaction reconciliation lookup, where if there are certain ones in there, you can click on and it will pull up a different tab for each one and help you search them to try to find it faster.
Nice. Saving precious seconds.
Precious,
as
clicks.
Hector would say.
Yes. Dealer duplicates. This is a big one. And there's so many different ways this could go, but I wanted to try to highlight the green box. And guys, since I'm color blind, and that is green, right?
Okay. That is green, yes.
Okay, so the green box means it came through either a bank, basically through the banking center. You either imported transactions in, or a bank feed was connected and it used it to pull the transaction directly. That's how you get the linked transaction towards the top left on the transaction itself. And the ones where they don't have it is where something was manually entered. So if you're doing this and you have, you've got to do your research, check it out. What I would actually do in this scenario is I'd go back to this specific one with the green box. I would go to edit, and then I would delete it to where, because it's linked, it goes back to the bank feed area. I want to slow down and stress. If you delete the manual one, it's gone. If you delete a piece that's been connected through a bank feed, it goes back to the bank feed, because then you can match it and you get the green box on the one you manually put in. So
tidying it up with a bow, putting a bow on it. It's
a nice green bow.
Yes. That you can't see if it's green or not.
And then to do exactly to do and undo, or whether you should or not undo reconciliations. This
I feel
is
some Shakespeare going on here.
to undo or not to undo. That is the reconciliation, something like that. I cannot stand when I have these extra little things back behind here, even though it's completely fine. You'll notice on this one here, 1130 with the minus 2,500. Dan, you talked earlier, Michelle, you were talking about the fact like your beginning balance is off, right? And you need to fix it. Or bank feed broke, you need to reconnect it. And being helpful, they decided that they would actually put another opening balance in there for you. And that automatically reconciled. So some reason your tolls are off. When you have these, if you put, every time I'm jumping to something new to do reconciliation, I will put the same ending date as the last reconciliation and the same ending reconciliation balance, the proper one, pull it right back up and first see if there's anything just sitting inside there. And you can do that same trick, click off anything that is pending there that should have still been reconciled, and very quickly click the button and make it to where it gets to the right balance, and now you get your zero. Only thing is, you do it a whole bunch of times, it starts looking ugly. So as accountants, we have that batch undo to get back to those. Just be sure if you don't have these statements as attachments, take a screenshot of it first, because it's telling you the ending balance and the ending date and balance for each of the months, so you can go back and do those recs really quickly. Because theoretically, you know that the transaction stuff should be there.
Yeah, the one thing about undoing that I want to caution people about is the fact that undo just undoes what was done during the reconciliation, right? So if you do something outside of the reconciliation, it will not get undone, right? Like, so if you do go reconcile a transaction in the register, or if you added something to make it work, that, especially after the fact, undoing doesn't undo that, right? Like, so when you connect the bank feed, for example, and it pulls in a balance that's reconciled and it puts the transaction in the register, that transaction is not going to be touched by an undo process.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes. And I'm going to pull up the poll. As I do that, Lisa, is the audio better, by the way? Hopefully that will help get it a little bit louder for you to standardize it. So our next poll we're ready for, right, Dan?
Yes. Which one is what percent? Let's see. Gotta find it now. All right. What percent of your accounts are you able to do by automatic statement fetching? Oh, this is such a great thing.
One of the things in that reconciliation history that you were showing, one of the things that I like about that is, I think it was there where it was in the reconciliation history. I'm sorry, it wasn't there. In the reconciliation history, where you can see where you've previously reconciled, and it shows the statement date and like when you reconciled. It will also show if somebody forced the bank reconciliation, right? And so it will show like the statement date, the ending balance, and if you forced it to reconcile, it'll show the amount that went to miscellaneous discrepancies or reconciliation discrepancies. Anyhow, I had a client that kept doing that, but he also knew that if I saw something in reconciliation discrepancies on the P&L, that he was in trouble because he forced the bank reconciliation. Because I told him he's got to reconcile every month, right? So he would click reconcile now and let it go to reconciliation discrepancy. And then I'd call him up and yell at him, undo it, make him fix it, and redo it correctly and stuff. Well, one month he decided he was going to get smart, he thought. He went in and found it in reconciliation discrepancies and moved it to office supplies. And I called him up and I was like, David, you did it again. You forced that bank reconciliation. He says, how did you know? I said, I told you I know everything. Because that report or that screen where it says the reconciliation history will still show you when they forced it, even though the little booger went in and changed it from reconciliation discrepancies and moved it to office supplies. I still could see in that area when he forced the bank reconciliation. So even though your client tries to pull one on you, QuickBooks helps you stay one step ahead of them.
You're like Lord Varus. You have little birds in QuickBooks that tells you.
That's right.
Tells on people.
So there are these little tools that we take for granted that are very helpful when you have sneaky clients.
Okay, and it looks
All
like
right.
we got 100% there.
All right, and yeah, it's the biggest one is 55% of 0 to 19%, and I think I saw in the comments, that it's unreliable. Some of the things about statement fetching in general, and we'll talk a little bit about maybe some of the tech behind that, but yeah, it's when it works, it's great.
It's a good point. Yeah. So let me go back to our share here. And so the next area I really want to kind of share about is specialized workflows. And one of the things that drive me nuts in the program are the transfers and the credit card payment options. Transfers are always the problem. Always, 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 always the problem. You need to make sure, like every time you have it, and because it's trying to link to two different pieces, I've seen where somebody's managed to match 4 transfers in one account to one transfer on one other side somehow, and things and balances get completely knocked off, and it's just very, very difficult to find those unless you undo them and really like it becomes faster just to get rid of them and put them back in. But I'll show you some tricks that I have on that. Additionally, deposit detail reporting. I've got the way we do deposits. I feel it's a little bit of an extra step, but it saves a lot of time. It helps you capture any situation where an owner is investing money in the business or taking it out. And then, of course, you've got your merchant processing. If you're using external merchant processing, are they batching transactions together? Are they taking the fee out at the same time, or is it a separate fee? Your third-party applications. The order in which you do all of anything with the third-party apps becomes super, super important. So this is one that I've been talking about this forever, and especially with bank rules, it makes the most sense to do this. The way we do every transfer is we will create a vendor every time. We create a clearing account first, and then we create a vendor that will be transferred to 1, 2, 3, 4, transfer from 5, 6, 7, 8, where the last 4 digits are the last 4 digits of the account. That gives me the ability to create money in, money out rules, and you set it up where you've got multiple parts of bank text. It's always bank text. Contains transfer to, the next one, the numbers. And by doing this, it goes from one into a clearing, out of the clearing to the other. And because of the rules, it's just as efficient as the transfers, but you get names on all your transactions and you get to see the in and out very easily. So you can go back and reconcile the stuff very, very fast.
I can't see that easily at all.
That
I don't, yeah.
But I mean, I think that I want to talk a little bit about the challenge, right, of what you're talking about, right? Because this is a unique situation where you have potentially both sides of the transfer connected in your bank feed, and those rules,
Great
like
point.
it really just can it really who acts on it first, right? So if it's a savings account that automatically puts it in to the checking account because you set up a bank rule to do so, or the checking account to the savings account, or credit card to the checking account. It's whoever gets to it first, and then it causes other challenges if it's not a transfer. Like, what am I doing seeing a deposit with a negative amount in my checking account, right? Because it's money coming in or out, and it gets recorded as a deposit or an expense that is adding money to a register. It can just look really confusing, especially if you're not expecting it to see that way. So I really like what you're talking about here with setting something up in between, as a go-between, so that you can take advantage of those rules. And then it really doesn't matter what kind of transfer, what kind of transaction it is. It could be a transfer, it could be a deposit, it could be an expense, it could be a check, or whatever, right? And then it's fine from that account perspective.
Yeah. The worst part about this, I cannot tell you how many times I've caught new accounts we were never told about because of doing it this way. That's the best and the worst. It's best because you caught it. It's worse because now you have historical stuff you have to put in. You have to have the conversation like, what do you mean you opened up 3 new credit card accounts? You didn't tell me about it yet. So it again, if you're doing it, it's going to zero itself out every time. So at the end of the month, you have to reconcile that account back down. If there's anything left, either somebody invested money in the business or they took it out to a non-business account or an account is missing. So kind of my logic to that part. Michelle, what are your thoughts there?
I think that's a great process to follow. And that's the most important thing, is to have a process and do it one way all the time consistently, because that helps eliminate duplicates. Otherwise, you're doing it from this account and from that account, and then you're getting duplicates and all that. So I think that's a great tip, though. Thank you for sharing that.
Put all the problems in a bucket, right? So
Yep. Love it.
So I already talked about this piece that by doing it, it gives you the different, having it, I always do all the transfer rules as a vendor and having names on it. Every transaction should have a name, every single transaction, because if you have problems or challenges, you have to do the research, you have more tools to do stuff. The next one I wanted to kind of go into is dealing with deposits. And this is, again, this is a unique one. The ultimate goal here is we have to be able to do the reconciliations, and a lot of the times duplicates, as we mentioned before, can come into play because if you have multiple payments by customers combined into one deposit, your bank, if you accept the bank feed piece, that will match, that comes in, but then you have your undeposited funds that starts growing, right? Everything else. Or if you're creating multiple deposits, one for each person, they're never going to match easily. And it drives me nuts when you have 3 different individual deposits that are selected because you remember that those matched to the one single number. But if I ever have to come back later and I'm doing it, I'm not going to know it. So we created an account I called Revenue Query. It's just because you can't create rules for uncategorized income unless that changed recently. And what it allows me to do is basically take all of my deposits quickly and toss them right into a Revenue Query account. Then with all this stuff put into the bucket, I can come through, and as part of my end of the month close process, I pull up a deposit detail report, and I can then have pull up all the different images if there's multiple checks and go and actually check off the correct pieces that tie into it and spend down that revenue query. So,
and what type of account is Revenue Query?
It's a different income account. So it still sits up in basically it sits up in your income area, because when it's in there, that's always supposed to be knocked down to 0 is the whole point. As you start to spend these down, it should equal the same amount when you put it to Revenue Query in the bottom. So you've got Revenue Query when you go pull up your deposit detail If it's not broken down with the names in here, so vendors, if it's a refund, would have a name as well. You click on the top line, you would then come in, find the pieces, check them off, and then come down here, click off the trash can, get rid of it. It doesn't break the reconciliation. So you can actually go through, clear out your bank feeds, reconcile, and still go back and then clear this out before you finish your month end all the way.
You're getting some kudos in the chat there. So that's nice.
It's such a big, it just helps save so much time, because the other part of this also is, this is the same kind of a concept that if you're using a Stripe or something else and you have a customer sales receipt for $350, but the amount that came through the deposit was $345, you can actually check off the $350, merchant fee at the bottom, -$5. Now it pops it right back in. Didn't break the reconciliation, saves you a whole bunch of time. It's all about getting these different problems in a controlled bucket before you.
And somebody mentioned in the chat, and don't peek at the P&L because your revenue will be overstated. How do you coach your client about that? Because then, I mean, you can look at it and at least you know what you're looking for, but how do you avoid questions from the client? Like, wait a minute, what's this revenue query? And do you frame that up front?
Yeah, because usually when I'm having to do more of this, it's because they're not getting sales receipts or invoices in on time to be able to match things right away. Mm-hmm. And we always train them and let them know what we're doing. So it's don't stress on this until this is. The other option where most people would do this is they put this into ask my accountant or ask client name. And now you have deposits and an expense. And it's weird. Do your financials still work the same? Yeah, but it's wonky. So I like it up at the top because it's a spend down. If it's accrual based, right? And you haven't created any of the sales receipts or invoices, it's still right. If it's cash basis, and the stuff isn't in there, it's still right. It's only when you're actually having both the invoice in there and on a cash basis, right? And then you've also got the revenue query, that would double your income until you spend it away to match the payments. That's it. I think I said all that right, Michelle? Did I? If I didn't,
yes, that sounds right. Sorry,
okay.
I was looking for the mute button. Yes, that sounds right, but I wasn't listening closely because I was also talking about a sheet laws in the chat or on the Q&A.
Okay.
So, but yes, that sounded correct.
So we're pretty close. I think we're doing okay time-wise on all the stuff here. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. So then the last part again, syncing with third-party apps. We could be here for the rest of the day and talk about a lot of these different things. What it all comes down to is truly understanding what the workflow is. This is why I like doing workflow design, is figuring out, okay, the beautiful thing about QuickBooks Online and cloud-based accounting is it's a database in the sky, and they can allow different apps that specialize in different areas to connect and handle the hard parts of the workflow. You just need to make sure which data gets accepted first through the banking area so it can match correctly. So again, like a bookkeeper, a sender, A2X for e-commerce, bookkeep's going to create journal entries. Well, when you do your mapping, you want to make sure whatever is hitting through the journal entry, always try to make it match exactly what's the actual bank feed. It just makes you a lot happier. That's pretty much the same for all of these different type of programs. Just keep that in mind, and it will help save you a lot of time.
Yeah, and when you've added more apps, let me launch a poll, and I'll talk about that. Which one? Do you use transfers? There we go. Zoom changed something again. Love when technology changes. And now I have more poll questions than I actually created poll questions for the webinar. So now I got to find more than.
I did it.
Yes, it's Michelle's fault. And I forgot what I was talking about before I launched the poll. I what were we? Oh, when you have multiple apps, and knowing exactly, like you were saying, where that is going to take place, and if
Yeah.
there is a shortfall in that integration, like I'm working with, well, I mean, you mentioned bookkeep there, right? And understanding that that's going to only bring in journal entries, right? And how, is that automation potentially, limiting some of the workflows that you would be doing inside of QuickBooks, or is there a like some of like Cinder or some of the sales connectors, they're mostly concerned with just getting the sale into QuickBooks, but then that passing the baton of taking it to the payout, taking out the fees and those types of things, they're not too concerned with. So really understanding what that integration will actually look like when you see it inside of QuickBooks, so that you can take it to the goal line of, I want to reconcile, right?
This made me also think about $0 sales receipts. But first, I actually would like to, there's a good question that was asking about talking about reconciliations for QuickBooks checking. And I have to be honest, I don't really use it. And the clients I have are not using it. So I'm not as familiar with that piece. I wish I could give answers to it. But Dan, Michelle, might you have some guidance on it?
The way it kind of started, right? So like the whole idea when it was QuickBooks Cash, right? Like, and then it turned into QB checking. Accountants kind of got were the afterthought of that.
Surprise!
I got 99
surprise.
problems and they're all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little bit of foreshadowing there, maybe.
Yeah.
But like, accountants couldn't access the account at all, right? Like it was initially set up as business owner or primary admin only could have access to that, and then through feedback, thank you for submitting all the feedback, accountants can have the access to it. But there's still things in that you can't access. But yes, you can get the statements now, and you can view the statements from as an accountant. I mean, I use it myself, but it's my business, so I'm one and the same on both sides of that. I don't have clients or people where I'm just the the accounting professional in that position to know some of the subtle nuances with regards to that, but that history makes sense as to where you might be finding the shortfall. But you should have access to the statements as an accountant, and so that you can get them, but you got to get to them, through the banking side. It's not in they don't necessarily show up as statements that are fetched, but you should be able to access them through your client QuickBooks.
Stay tuned for our last poll, and you're going to understand why based on a question like that. So, people, I think we're pretty close on that poll. Do you want to share that last piece? We're down towards the last little bit of the slides where we wanted to kind of somewhat quickly talk about some other technology. And I think this starts to become more of like a open conversation. And then if there are other things we want to pull up QuickBooks Online to show, we can do that, of course, as well. So thank you guys for all the interaction today and the questions. Honestly, it makes it more fun for all of us when everybody's having a good time. So different tools. And again, we could do a whole series on just something like this. So different kind of tools for collecting and working with the data. Full disclosure, I like to always do that at the beginning. I've been using LedgerSync since like 2015, 2016. I'm very proud to say I'm now a consultant, a paid consultant with them. I'm not here in that role today, but I've been working with them to help them build out their own global rules engine, which is designed to help us basically create rules that can live across all your clients at once instead of having to go in and out of every single company file and work and process transactions. Now, what LedgerSync really, its core functionality for the longest time has been is fetching your transactions, your statements, and your images, check and deposit images. There were other apps like this in the past. HubDoc, everybody was a big fan of that, right? HubDoc still exists, but they don't really do the fetching part. File this is gone. Most every company that's out there, they've all gotten out of the game because it is so difficult through all these different financial institutions to stay connected. We even partner with MasterCard to connect with over 10,000 institutions to grab statements. And I got some bad news for everybody. They're making it tougher and tougher and tougher to keep getting the statements. I will not be surprised if we see a dip in statement availability in QuickBooks Online as well. Will not be surprised.
Is that a financial institution's decision, or is that more of just security, or both? Right, like it's trying to make it more difficult for bad actors to get into this information.
So what it has to do with primarily is back in the day with all the statement fetching, everything else, that's because everybody was going in through the front door, screen scraping and grabbing this information, pulling it back to you. As more institutions move over to an API, an approved handshake behind the scenes, that is providing the transactional data, but they are still scraping the statements is what's been happening through all this. So Fiserv, Finicity MasterCard, Plaid, I know more about this stuff than any human ever should, thanks to Maurice and LedgerSync and how it works back in the day. For example, you guys might remember Wells Fargo a long time ago for the bank feeds, when they started putting in the pre-approved authorization on XX date XX. Do you know they did that just to stuff the bank memo so you'd have to go to the bank to download it and have it be useful? Like, so I won't hound on that. Yeah, thank you. True authenticity, Wells Fargo, thank you. Okay. So there's a lot of different tools out there that will actually help and grab some of this stuff. Dan, you've been testing out BotKeeper and some of their process, right? So I'd love to let you talk about that because
I mean, I've talked to the folks at BotKeeper, and really tried to understand what the heck BotKeeper actually is, and they invited me to be a beta tester for them, and they are rolling out a function called Auto Bank Rec, where they will actually fetch the statement. If it's supported, right? I mean, that's all the caveat. If this statement is supported, it also can be uploaded into their portal. But what it will allow you to ultimately do is see that the general ledger or their bank feed side by side with the statement, and then you can just either confirm. It will either try to match, right? It'll match the transaction, or tell you, okay, there's some discrepancies with the statement. You can bring up the statement and see for yourself if it's there. The really cooler part of it is that if it doesn't support statement fetching, or if it doesn't even support connecting, to a bank feed, and you have access to the statement, you can upload the statement and still use that auto bank rec option. It'll just look at what's in QBO at the time, and allow you to compare. And it's in beta. So let me preface that it's being beta tested. So there are some beta things to it, like and some of the challenges with you mentioned paying down credit cards. Like it can't see that type of transaction, but they're working on fixing that, right? So when it rolls out, it might be a really cool ad to be able to do that. And BotKeeper does other things too in that portal, and that's not its only thing.
So you're basically saying sometimes these apps can neither confirm nor deny if they're getting it right.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it was cool. It was cool because I'm testing it out with Corpay. Corpay is a MasterCard. So they don't connect to QuickBooks Online for bank feeds. And their statement that they give you is oriented in two different orientations, horizontal, portrait and landscape. And it's able to actually read that.
It is?
And yes. Surprisingly,
I didn't think you were going that way. Okay, that's impressive. Okay.
So I'm like, here's a fun one for you, and I uploaded the statement, and lo and behold, it's got transactions from the statement side for me to match, and it's got the information in it. that's actually, sideways if you actually looked at the PDF.
They need to turn that thing upside down or whatever they say. So
Yeah.
Relay, other online banking, they of course give you the access to the images and statements for their specific accounts. I could have made a whole bunch of other tools on here as well. The ones I wanted to share right off the bat is MoneyThumb, hands down the best I've ever used for their OCR technology, PDF OCR technology. And what I mean by that very, very specifically, you've got paper statements, you scan them in, and they're not a first edition digital line items nice and clean. This will do a better job on statements than anything else I've seen. The only other thing that's probably close, but it's not really for statements, has been Maker's Hub. Their OCR, large language model, is pretty dang impressive. So really, really like it. They can convert to CSV files or .qbo files. And there's a lot of tools inside of that of how you manipulate and use it. I've got videos on my YouTube channel. I'm sure there's a couple other ones. Hector's done them as well. ProperSoft, I would recommend buy their suite. This is one of those things, I think it's right now $200 for their whole lifetime version of all of their different converters. Just have it ready to go. You never know if you're going to need to go to a CSV, to a QBO, to an OFX, to a blah, blah, blah. Really great tool. Dext is another one that does the statement OCR parsing. I believe they're still doing that inside of their program, right? If anybody knows. So those are three just kind of quickies to share as well. And
Last pool question.
did we
Yeah,
share
so
the last one, which was 74% said yes for using transfers and the other, I think?
I did share for a little bit.
Okay. So
All right. So, and this was part of the challenge when Matt and I were talking about, what are we going to talk about here? Is that there is definitely a rabbit hole that we could go down as far as, the nuances of the bank feeds. And it's been a while since Michelle and I had done, ruling the rules in QuickBooks Online, and really just kind of talking about some of the technology behind the rules that you can and the bank feeds, that when you take advantage of that tool, it's either going to create some efficiencies for you, or it's going to make your life a living hell if you if you do it improperly. And so we were thinking maybe this is a series that we have Matthew come on and do this sort of thing. And would you be interested in that?
Yeah.
Do we talk about that? Do we go into some of these apps a little bit deeper? What do you want, right?
Yep. And as we're going to finish the poll there, I'll finish the last couple of slides because I know I always like to try to keep us right on the time as best possible for everybody's, schedule of the day. So back to you, Dan.
Yeah, so always check us out at the qbepowerhour.com website. But there is something right there on the homepage where you can put in suggestions for things that you want us to talk about or unpack. Matthew, I really appreciate you joining us here today and all the hard work that you put into today's lesson.
Thank you.
And hopefully there's some, if the chat is any indication, there are some definite nuggets that people took away from today. And Michelle, always great to see you as well.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you, Dan, and thank you, Matt, for joining us. Thank you both for everything. I've got to run. Thanks, everybody.